Hello and welcome to today's Lemongrass Live. My name is Jo Derry-Bennett from the Lemongrass marketing team, and I'd also like to introduce and welcome our panelists and discussion leaders today. So we have Ben Lingwood and Zane Wilson from Lemongrass and Wesley Gentine from AWS. Welcome. Just before we start, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So this session is being recorded. We'll share the link with you afterwards. And also we'll share the contact details for Ben, Zane and Wesley. We've also got a live question possibility, and the control panel on your screen enables you to enter questions at any time. So please feel free to as we go along, and we'll answer as many as we can within the session. But for now, I'll hand over to Ben to start the session. Thanks.
Thanks, Jo. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are, and welcome to this month's Lemongrass Live. So this is an informal chat, just the three of us talking about some of our favourite topics and bugbears in the industry that we work in. So today's one is going to be an interesting one because it's probably one of the most emotional topics in the known IT universe. The dreaded topics of SLAs and business continuity, and everybody, regardless of what you think, everybody has an opinion on the topic of business continuity and high availability. So this session, we're going to focus on some of the gotchas we see common in this area, how you can identify them, some of the recommendations on how to deal with them. It's quite a challenging topic at the best of times, but let's kick off with some quick introductions. So let me hand the mic over to Wesley to just do a quick online introduction.
Hello, hi Ben, hi Zane, hi everyone. So I'm Wesley Gentini, as Jo just started. So I'm an SAP Specialist Solutions Architect at AWS, and I usually cover the markets of DACH, Italy, and Iberia, but I'm based out of the Netherlands. I have 19 years of experience in the SAP space. I started my career as a systems administrator, then later a basis administrator. And then I spent a long time on that, working with different customers in several different countries, also to understand the differences of their business. So thanks for having me today here.
Thanks, Wesley. Zane.
Hi everyone, I'm Zane Wilson. I'm an SAP on AWS solution architect with Lemongrass. I've been at Lemongrass for 5 years, and I head up our EMEA capability for SAP architecture on AWS.
And then finally, yours truly, Ben Lingwood, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Lemongrass. I've spent far too many years, about 25 years in the SAP ecosystem in industry and consulting in SAP, and never that far away from a technical eye through those years. So let's get this party started. So let's start off with the first question. Zane, let me throw this one at you. So you and I live in a very similar world inside Lemongrass. I think a lot of the time we spend time having to educate and design at the same time with customers. When you do things in a cloud environment, it's something very different from the way things have often been traditionally done. So a lot of organizations and people, when they ask RFPs, RFIs, get stuck in the way that they're thinking with traditional architecture. So here's your chance to vent on some of the key areas and challenges you see.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we see, as perhaps a naive way of coming to AWS is treating AWS, particularly for SAP architectures, where SAP is basically lots of really big servers, lots of storage, lots of number crunching. So the danger is that you treat AWS just like an infrastructure as a service data center, and you go, well, Amazon's got servers, Amazon's got storage. Let's bring all of our knowledge of how we do things into the cloud, and things will just work the same. So that's you can do that, but if you do that, you're going to miss out on a lot of the capabilities that you have in a cloud environment, where you've got the massive power of theoretically unlimited capacity, the orchestration capabilities, and generally very high performance and very high reliability of the Amazon components. And where Amazon components fail, they fail in a very easy to detect and easy to script around way. So when it comes to defining how you're going to do high availability and disaster recovery in an Amazon environment, it really pays to understand that cloud environment first. So don't bring your traditional active passive software cluster thinking directly to the cloud. Consider you've got your Amazon regions. Where are you going to put your infrastructure? How are you going to leverage the availability zones? Don't think about your traditional physical hardware when you're looking at Amazon instances. And when you're then bringing your infrastructure to AWS, try not to bring your SLAs from on-premise as well. So you're going to have SLAs that are talking about percentages of availabilities, RPOs and RTOs and those sorts of things. What it really pays to do is to take a step back and say, why do I have those SLAs? What behaviors, what type of availability, what I need from my system? Why do I have those SLAs? And then try to go back to basics and say, well, what are the things I can do in my environment that that meet those underlying requirements, rather than just being absolutely hung up on a 4-hour RTO, for example. So being able to be very fine-grained. Does every system need the same 1-hour or 4-hour type of recovery capability? Maybe some systems don't. If you've got systems that aren't transactional, you can perhaps lose a little bit of data, and it doesn't really matter. On Amazon, because everything is so flexible and programmable, you really have the ability to give your environment exactly what it needs in terms of capacity, availability, redundancy, and so on. So that's probably the it's a very high level view, but it's really important to not think of Amazon as another data center where everything works the same as it does on premise. There's a lot of power in that orchestration capability that Amazon gives you, that allows you to reimagine how you do high availability and disaster recovery. Ben, we often get told there's a lot of radical changes in pricing and solutioning between providers, and sometimes we see that there's some compromises in shortcuts. What do you see in terms of the ways that the different providers look at doing this sort of design, particularly when it comes to the more complex HA and DR solutions?
Okay, yeah, that's often an area of gotchas, I think. So let's talk about some of the things that we see that cause issues and problems when we're looking at the architectures, when we're going through typical design cycles. So some particular bugbears of mine. Let's start with stacking. So stacking solutions, stacking databases together, multiple things together on one machine. So for me, that is a product born of the on-premise infrastructure world. You want to get as much bang for buck out of your systems you can, cram it on, use all the available space. Makes perfect sense. In an Amazon world, back to your point earlier, actually, Zane, just bringing that across, big mistake in our world. So that bites you in the ass a bit more in a hyperscaler world, because it kills the ability to scale independently, right size a system, use only the size you need when you need it. Kills a lot of the cloud benefits. So I can't do granular auto scaling. I can't do scheduling to bring that system up and down on a different schedule because it's tied with maybe a system that's got a different schedule. I can't do DevOps models. Okay, so I can't build those systems on demand and spin them out and do copies because it's maybe cohabiting or a multi-tenant with another system. And it also makes one of the big areas that I think one of the key areas for cloud is automation. Automation is really tough when I'm now orchestrating two systems that are effectively joined at the hip on the same EC2 image, right? So makes it really complex. So I would take away stacking systems completely, and that's even before we talk about things like maintenance as well. Cardinal sin on that is where people stack maybe a QA and a dev system together as well. Start mixing tiers. That's always a bit of a nightmare whenever we see that. So really encourage people to sort of unpack things. I'd also say another one for me is sort of crappy storage strategies as well, and this is something we commonly see as well. Dead easy to make a really cheap system because I put everything on one or two very cheap disk types behind on Amazon, right? Lots of different disk architectures you can put in. So I would say make sure, two things with that. So make sure, one, that is a HANA certified disk image if it's running on HANA. And we all know now there's tooling online on SAP. You can submit your disk architecture and they'll validate that for you. We've seen some complete nightmares of people bringing on-premise disk architectures, one type of disk, and then wonder why everything goes up in a heap of smoke on the first batch window or spike event. So watch out for that one. That's a really key one with disk architectures. And then we come on to more prevalent ones, like where people have got extreme SLAs, 4 nines, 5 nines, something like that, and you lift the lid and they're not even clustering the operating system. So you look at unstable foundations down there and you think, okay, while you're clustering the DB layer or clustering the application level, but they're not treating further downstream, you're on unstable foundations. So again, I'd say look at the science behind the SLA. Despite what you've been sold or despite what you're looking on, it's important to look down the full stack and make sure you've got the science on that. So there's a lot of things in there. Snapshots are another one. People using snapshots instead of proper backups. Another mistake, you can't do fine-grained point-in-time recovery if you're just doing snaps in time. So things to think about from that. So these are all things that we've experienced doing RFPs, RFIs, working with customers. And there's kind of this race to the bottom on pricing that encourages these sorts of behaviors for people to take shortcuts on architecture. So my summary would be, if it's too good to be true on a pricing, probably is, if it's separate from other pricings that you've got. Sorry, that was rather a monologue, but as you can tell, it's a topic that we have to educate on a lot. That kind of leads on to a nice segue, I think, Wesley, one for you. So how do you protect against rogue architecture? So something that we see a lot in Lemongrass. I know in Amazon you've got the well-architected framework, which is obviously designed to start detecting some of these errors. So give us your view on how you can use that, what it means, and how people should apply it.
Absolutely, happy to speak about that. Yeah, so the well-architected framework is a set of prescriptive questions that really makes you think about every single details of your environment. And then whenever you're moving to the cloud or even running on your on-premise environment, so sometimes customers are only thinking about the technical infrastructure part of the solution, but they are not thinking about the big picture, right? They move to the cloud, but then what about the interfaces? How they are going to do patching, maintenance in these servers? Do they really have in mind what the SLA that they are looking for is really something that is achievable? Or then if it's achievable in different ways in different cloud providers as well, or in their own premises, right? So and the well-architecture framework is going to think about like questions about, we're talking about 5 pillars, right? So the first one is operational excellence. How will you maintain the system in a way that is not going to break? The second one is security. Security is job zero at AWS. So we're always thinking about ways of making sure that you are only exposing what is really necessary to the internet or to other systems, and also thinking about the principle of the least privilege. So you don't give more privilege than you really need to make that thing work. It can be an interface, it can be anything. Reliability. So how do you recover from failure? How do you make sure you have a DR, a strategy in place, and it actually works, and you test it considerably, several times just to make sure that whenever you need, it's going to work. So performance efficiency. So sometimes you really have to think about the trade-off. So does your business really need that super powerful and expensive system? Is it really mission critical for your business? How much this is going to cost for you if you have a downtime of like 2 hours a year? And what is the cost of a system that will never stop? So this is how we really need to think. Remember, SLA sometimes, depending on the company, we are talking about insurance and not real back-end technical scenarios. So the well-architected framework is going to think about things like if your AWS, if your SAP system is really adhering to the AWS standards and good practices. So the second one is landing zone. How we really start your own VPC and all of the components, different accounts. And this needs to make sure that this needs to make sense to your organization. So that's why we have to ask these business questions as well. And then once you move, are you using the right images or operating system images, the correct versions? Is this, in the product availability matrix of SAP, is it fully supported by all of the vendors involved in these scenarios? So are you using the right AWS services in the first place? Because sometimes you have many different ways of doing things, but it doesn't mean that it's the most efficient or the most cost optimized one, which is the latest pillar of the architecture framework, cost optimization. We always think about ways of reducing the cost as much as possible without breaking all of the principles of your SLAs and your business requirements. So then you're talking about backup. Backup is a very interesting topic because you have many ways to take backup. So we can do snapshots, but you can also use, for example, in AWS, if you're running an SAP HANA database, the backend integration that saves all of your backups straight into S3, which is our cheapest storage product in our platform. So, but gives you all of the SLAs that you were looking for sure, because it's actually quite high. We're talking about 11 nines of SLA for durability. And other things that we do, so with the our architecture framework, asking all of these questions and getting you to answer those questions, we make sure that you have confidence in your solution. That it's not just a matter of testing. You know if it's going to work or not, because you know every single detail that should be paying attention for. If you realize that after all of these questions, everything is dramatically different, so you should do a well-architected review. And well-architected review is an exercise run by AWS or by a certified partner like Lemongrass. And because it's not just about asking questions and getting the answers, you need to have experience in interpreting these different questions and answers. So you know what to do and how to react. And then you also need to know about SAP. So it's not just about AWS. And these are kind of difficult skill sets to find, and Lemongrass can definitely help you on that. So if you were still not convinced that it's the right thing for you, ask to run POC. That's the best way to make sure that everything is going to work as you expect, and then by then you can make a wise decision. Most of our customers that are still thinking like, well, I don't know if I'm going to move to the cloud, if they run a POC, the success rate it's above 95%.
Great. Thanks, Wesley. So, Joe, I'm just scanning the list here. So we've had some questions come in. Do you want to MC a few?
Yeah, we've got a few actually. Let me start with this first one. So SLAs were mentioned that they can be fine-grained. Does that mean it's possible to have different recovery metrics in the same environment?
Okay, I'll have a crack at that one. Yeah, I think Zane mentioned this one earlier actually, and when he was talking about things, I think that's actually something we encourage actually. Quite a common mistake, and I think this is another on-premise translation, is people will, what's my SLA for production, what's my RTO and RPO, and actually recovery time and recovery point objectives are way more valuable than SLA in my view, because it actually dictates what the pattern is that we can use for the recovery and gives you more fine-grained cost control. But you can actually look at different applications in an Amazon world and choose different recovery patterns, even in the same environment. So I think Zane mentioned earlier, so if I've got systems of record, ECC, BW, whatever it is, fine, go for it. We'll do a synchronous replication, zero recovery time objective, recovery point objectives nice and low, make that nice and optimized. But if it's a system that you maybe could afford to lose 15 minutes of information, I don't know, a middleware piece of application because it's batch, that allows us to have access to something maybe like a pilot-like architecture, so more of an asynchronous, and that has a big impact then on the pricing as well. So the more you think about that, the more granular you can get that, the finer grain the architecture, the better the price optimization. So I'd actually encourage, think about maybe a tier 1 or tier 2 SLA, even within something like a production strategy architecture. Yeah, good one.
Okay, thanks for that one. Next question, Wesley, I think this is for you actually. It's about the well-architected reviews. So are there best practices about when they're done, the frequency? Tell us a little bit more about how, what and when.
Yeah, so whenever it makes sense for your business, for example, if you just run a migration, and you want to make sure that everything you have, of course, it takes planning. And if you do the planning correctly, you may not need to do lots of changes after. But if you run the well-architected review, you can make sure that all you have done in the planning phase was actually followed in the execution process. And then if you find any deviations, you can always react to that and fix those issues. And by the way, like I said, the questions, it's just going to motivate you to think about the different possibilities, and then it requires a little bit of interpretation. Sometimes different customers may do things differently because these things make sense to their business in the way it is. So like I said, there is no one size fits all, but it's always important to do that. And then after the migration is one thing, and then the regularity, there is no fixed time to do that. But I always recommend you to do this regularly because things change it. And if you are not really experienced in that part of the operational excellence, things may change as you evolve, as you apply patches, as you upgrade. So you should really focus on that. Monitor all of the 5 pillars that I mentioned before. So you make sure that you are not going to have any surprises moving forward.
Thank you. Gio, I think we've got time for one more quick one.
Okay. I'm not sure it's quick. We've had contracts before when the cutover time was higher than stated. How do you ensure that you can achieve this? Isn't it even more complex with more recovery patterns?
Yeah, let me take that that one, Joe. So yeah, an SAP environment, whether it's on-premise or on the cloud, they tend to be quite complex. I mean, yeah, we see some customers that only have 1 or 2 systems, but that's certainly the rarity these days. So, if you've got 20 different production systems, particularly where, like we've been talking about, you have fine-grained SLAs, different point-in-time recovery objectives, different availability, and so on. And something goes wrong, it affects 1 or more systems. Well, how do you actually make sure that you can bring those systems up, you meet the SLAs and so on? When there's so many different, you've essentially made the environment more complex by having these fine-grained SLAs and 3 or 4 different levels of availability in the same environment. So really, this is where you need to start to leverage the capabilities of the automation, orchestration, and so on. So we've built some tooling that helps with this, but there's Amazon capabilities as well. So what you're going to do is really look at it in terms of layers. What do we do at the operating system layer? For things like EC2 instance auto restart, very valuable, a very basic thing that you can do, but can actually save your bacon half the time. Very, very useful to do. But then the applications that are sitting on top of those instances, well, how do you know when to start them or when to restart them? How do do you automatically start SAP whenever the box starts up? But what if you wanted to start the box for some maintenance? You need to have the ability to control very carefully when things start. And SAP environments are heavily integrated with each other. You don't want to start a portal system before the SLD is up, because it won't be able to figure out where its user store is located. So there's a lot of sort of interdependency between systems. And if 3 or 4 systems have gone down and you want to start, some things are already up, some things are down. How do you figure out the ordering? So we've built a solution which we call our distributed asset orchestrator, which is essentially has a map of all the SAP components in your environment, what the pieces of that are. So it understands not only that ECC depends on, so for example, PI for integration, but it also understands that ECC's app server depends on the database depends on the operating system, and so on, and enables you to start and stop services in groups or individual services on their own. So certainly when something goes wrong and you want to be able to address it quickly, but there's a lot of systems, you don't want to have to throw 10 basis guys at the problem, all trying to figure out what went wrong and what order to do things in. So certainly your automation there is very important. Where you've got very high SLAs and you've elected to go for some sort of automated detection and switchover, so clustering products, we tend to work quite heavily with the SUSE HA for SAP platform, which is very good. Then you need to have defined that very, very carefully and make sure that that's all running. And of course, always test, make sure that those things SAP environments are complex. SAP environments with automated recovery are even more complex. Make sure that you can test those. And on Amazon, throw down a duplicate of your production environment and do the testing on a copy of production instead of the real production environment to give you the ability to do those DR tests without even affecting your production environment. There's quite a lot of clever things that you can do in the cloud environment because of that on-demand and that sort of infinite capability to have very short-term environments. There's a lot of power that you can derive out of that, and that enables you to meet those SLAs, and not only meet them, but also prove to the business's audit function that you are able to meet those SLAs. Anyway, I could probably spend another hour talking about the details of this, but let's do a time check.
Yes, and I know for a fact, Zane, you can talk at least for 2 days on that one. So yeah, conscious of time, So let me ask my distinguished colleagues and friends here, just as a wrap up, what would be your 3 core takeaways from the discussion today, if you'd summarize down to 3 points? So Zane, when you're in the flow, let's start with you.
Sure. I mean, my first point, I think, is the one. Take time to learn what AWS is before you architect. Don't treat it like another data center, because yes, it works like a data center, but it's so much more. And if you just treat it like a data center, you're going to miss out on lots of the value. Don't bring your on-premise SLAs. Reconsider how your business needs to run, and see whether there's better ways of doing it. And the third one, I didn't actually get a chance to mention this before, but it kind of goes in with that whole RTO, RPO pieces. Backups are very expensive on AWS, so look very carefully at the availability of things like, Wesley mentioned S3. It's got hugely high durability. Do you really need to keep daily backups and logs and this and that? You could do very efficient backup patterns that reduce the amount of storage that you store, but still give you all of the recoverability that you need.
Thanks, Ian. Wesley, same question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first one, on AWS, we have a philosophy to always work backwards from customer requirements. So this first one is the most important one. So we need to ask questions to the customer, and the customer, of course, needs to collaborate in answering these questions honestly. What is the business impact of an outage? How much data the customer is really willing to lose? If all of the answers to these questions is 0, then you're going to have the most expensive solution. This is not what most of the customers need. There are different customers in different businesses, and they have different requirements. So this is the most important takeaway. The second one is SLAs have different meanings depending on the vendor you are talking. So make sure you are not just talking about insurance type of SLAs, that you have a technical design that can support those SLAs, right? So, and then if you are not yet convinced, run a POC. Then you can test if your SLAs are achievable or not. The same thing goes for RTO and RPO and disaster recovery tests. And then the last thing is, AWS will give all of the products that you need and in the console for you to consume, and then you can deploy your SAP workloads on AWS. But make sure that you are always leveraging a partner, a certified one on SAP and on AWS like Lemongrass, because they have all of the experience you need to make sure that your migration is going to be 100% successful. Customers may have an IT space, but they may not. The IT may not be their core business. So that's essential for a successful migration.
Thanks, Wesley. And I kind of focus on a couple of points you guys have touched, because I think that that's so key. So key when we see time and time again where people state an SLA that they want. So I'd say firstly, don't get stuck too much on SLAs. Think about the recovery time and the recovery point objective. They by far drive the recovery architecture much more than an SLA. But key thing, as we said, is don't be afraid to test the science behind the SLA. So if you're getting wildly different architectures from different suppliers stating the same SLA, don't be afraid to ask for that POC. I think Wesley pointed that out. It's a great way to test that. And if you need some help, make sure that you get a partner involved, like the well architecture, to come in and check the science and the architecture behind that as well. Detect those shortcuts that we were talking about earlier. Yeah. I'm going to come back to one of those questions because I think it was great. Think about the business requirements you need for each application. Very common, flood fill SLAs down all the applications, not really thinking about why, just an emotional attachment to a number. So look at why. Look at the RPO and RTO that you really need for each application, because it can, again, radically change the cost of ownership and what you're paying for within that system. And that really comes down to my third point, which is kind of summarizing all of that together. Just avoid that race to the bottom. It's a false economy, encourages shortcuts, encourages bad architecture, and ultimately, I'd say in every case we've seen it, it really hurts you downstream when you come on to maintenance and operations. Yeah. So with that, Joe, let me hand the mic back to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben, Zane and Wesley, for your insights and for answering the questions. And thanks to everyone who's joined today on our interactive discussion. As mentioned at the start, this session has been recorded, so in the next few days I'll share the link to the recording and also the contact details for Ben, Zane and Wesley if you'd like to follow up further. As this is a monthly activity, we've got further sessions scheduled, details are available on our website, and we look forward to joining you in the coming weeks and months. So thanks ever so much for your time, and I wish you a good rest of the day. Thanks.
Thanks everyone.